The wind howled like a wounded animal across the Montana plains, carrying with it the promise of death wrapped in white. Sarah Margaret Collins pressed her gloved hands against the frosted window of the stagecoach, watching the world outside dissolve into a churning wall of snow. She had been traveling for 3 days from Boston, carrying nothing but 2 carpetbags, a teaching certificate, and a heart full of desperate hope. At 24 years old, she was fleeing a life that had become unbearable, trading the suffocating expectations of Eastern society for the raw uncertainty of the frontier. Her father had arranged a marriage to a banker twice her age, a man whose breath smelled of whiskey and whose eyes held a cruelty that made her skin crawl. So she had answered an advertisement for a schoolteacher in a place called Copper Ridge, a settlement so small it barely appeared on any map. She had imagined starting over, becoming someone new, someone free. But now, as the blizzard swallowed everything in its path, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The stagecoach driver, a grizzled man named Cal with a face like weathered leather, shouted something she couldn't hear over the wind. The horses screamed in panic, their hooves slipping on ice that had formed beneath the snow. Sarah felt the coach lurch violently to one side, heard the sickening crack of wood splintering, and then the world turned upside down. She was thrown against the ceiling, then the floor, her head striking something hard. Pain exploded behind her eyes, followed by a ringing silence that seemed louder than the storm itself. When she opened her eyes, she was lying in a drift of snow that had poured through the shattered door. Blood trickled down her temple, freezing almost instantly against her skin. The cold was immediate and merciless, seeping through her wool traveling dress as if it were made of paper. She crawled out of the wreckage, her hands and knees sinking deep into the snow. The driver lay motionless a few feet away, half buried, his neck twisted at an angle that told her everything she needed to know. The horses were gone, either fled or dead somewhere in the white oblivion. She tried to stand but her legs wouldn't hold her. The wind tore at her clothing, at her hair that had come loose from its pins, at her very breath. This was how she would die, she realized with a strange clarity. Alone in the middle of nowhere, frozen solid before anyone even knew she was missing. Her father would never know what became of her. The children she was supposed to teach would never meet their new teacher. She would simply disappear, another soul claimed by the brutal West. She didn't know how long she knelt there in the snow, shaking so violently her teeth rattled in her skull. Minutes or hours, time had lost all meaning. Her thoughts became sluggish, dreamlike. She remembered her mother, dead these 10 years, and wondered if she would see her soon. She thought about the book of poetry she had packed in her bags, still somewhere in the wreckage. She had wanted to read Wordsworth to the children, to show them that beauty existed even in harsh places. How foolish that seemed now. How naive she had been to think she could survive out here. Then she saw him. At first she thought he was a hallucination, a trick of her freezing mind. A massive figure on horseback, emerging from the storm like something out of a myth. He was enormous, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed as wide as an axe handle. He wore a thick coat made of buffalo hide, and his hat was pulled low against the wind, but she could see a dark beard and eyes that pierced through the blizzard. He dismounted in one smooth motion despite his size, moving with the grace of someone who belonged to this wild land in a way she never would. He knelt beside her, and she saw his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30, with features carved by wind and sun. There was a jagged scar running from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, giving him a dangerous look, but his eyes held something unexpected. Concern. Kindness even. He said something she couldn't hear, then without asking permission, he scooped her up as if she weighed nothing at all. She wanted to protest, to maintain some shred of dignity, but she had no strength left. She sagged against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him through all those layers of hide and wool. He carried her to his horse, a massive bay that stood steady despite the howling wind. He lifted her onto the saddle, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around to grip the reins. She was cradled against him, surrounded by his heat, and for the first time since the crash, the cold retreated just a fraction. He urged the horse forward, and they rode into the storm. She had no idea where they were going or who this man was. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Someone had found her. She might survive this after all. The ride seemed endless. The world was nothing but white and wind and the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the man's solid presence at her back and his arms keeping her from falling. Once, she thought she heard him speaking to her, his voice a low rumble against her ear, but she couldn't make out the words. She wanted to thank him, to ask his name, to understand what was happening, but her tongue felt thick and frozen in her mouth. Finally, shapes emerged from the blizzard. Buildings, rough-hewn and sturdy. A barn. A house with smoke rising from its chimney, that blessed smoke meaning warmth and life. He dismounted and lifted her down, carrying her up wooden steps to a door that swung open before he could knock. She had an impression of firelight and warmth washing over her, of a spacious room with heavy furniture and animal pelts on the walls. He laid her on a rug before the fireplace, and she felt the heat of the flames on her frozen skin, painful and wonderful all at once. He knelt beside her again, pulling off her wet gloves with surprising gentleness for such large hands. His fingers were calloused and scarred, the hands of someone who worked hard for everything he had. He rubbed her hands between his own, trying to restore circulation. The pain was excruciating as feeling returned, needles of fire shooting through her fingers. She gasped and tried to pull away, but he held firm, his expression focused and determined. "You're going to be all right," he said, and this time she heard him clearly. His voice was deep and rough, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Not quite southern, not quite western, something in between. "You're safe now. I'm not going to let anything happen to you." She looked up at him, this giant of a man who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life, and something shifted in her chest. Gratitude, certainly, but something else too. Something that made her pulse quicken despite the cold still clinging to her bones. He met her gaze, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Firelight flickered across his scarred face, and she saw past the rough exterior to something deeper. Loneliness. A bone-deep solitude that mirrored her own. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper through chattering teeth. "Name's Jack," he said simply. "Jack McAllister. This is my ranch. And you're about 15 miles from anywhere else, so you're stuck here until this storm breaks." He paused, studying her face. "What's a lady like you doing out in weather like this anyway?" "I'm the new teacher," she said, the words feeling absurd now. "For Copper Ridge. I was supposed to arrive today." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or concern. "Copper Ridge is 2 days' ride north, even in good weather. Your driver was way off course." "He's dead," she said, and suddenly tears were streaming down her face, warm against her frozen cheeks. The shock and fear and cold all caught up with her at once, and she couldn't stop shaking. "The coach overturned and he's dead, and I thought I was going to die too." Jack's expression softened. He pulled a thick blanket from the back of a nearby chair and wrapped it around her shoulders. "But you didn't die. You're here. You're alive." He stood, his shadow falling across her. "I'm going to get you some dry clothes and something hot to drink. Then you're going to rest. Everything else can wait until tomorrow." He disappeared into another room, leaving her alone with the fire. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, breathing in the smell of wool and wood smoke and something else, something that was distinctly him. Leather and sage and the open range. She should have felt afraid, alone in a strange man's house in the middle of nowhere. But she didn't. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt safe. When Jack returned, he carried a bundle of clothing and a steaming mug. "These were my sisters," he said, setting the clothes beside her. She left them here when she married and moved to California. They should fit you well enough. He handed her the mug, and she wrapped her hands around it, savoring the warmth. The liquid inside smelled of herbs and honey. Drink that. It'll help. She sipped carefully, feeling the heat travel down her throat and settle in her stomach. Your sister, she said. Does she visit? Hasn't been back in 5 years, Jack said, his voice neutral. Letter came last spring saying she's expecting her 3rd child. I sent money for the baby. He moved to tend the fire, adding another log. It's just me here now. Me and the horses and about 200 head of cattle, give or take. You run this ranch alone? Have a few hands who work for me during roundup and branding. But winters, yeah, it's just me. He didn't look at her as he spoke, focusing on the fire. Gets quiet sometimes. But quiet's better than complicated. Sarah understood that sentiment all too well. I came west to escape complicated, she admitted. The warmth and the herb tea were making her feel loose, unguarded. My father wanted me to marry a man I couldn't stand. A man who hurt me. She hadn't meant to say that last part, but it slipped out anyway. Jack went very still. Then he turned to look at her, and there was something fierce in his eyes. He won't hurt you here. No one will. You have my word on that. She believed him. This man she had known for less than an hour, this stranger with scarred hands and a scarred face, she believed him completely. Thank you, she whispered. For finding me. For saving my life. Storm's going to last at least 3 days, Jack said, changing the subject as if her gratitude made him uncomfortable. You'll have to stay here until it passes. After that, I'll take you to Copper Ridge myself. Make sure you get there safe. 3 days. 3 days alone in this house with a man she didn't know. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a flutter of something that might have been anticipation. I don't want to impose. You're not imposing. You're surviving. He stood, towering over her again. Now get yourself changed into those dry clothes before you catch your death. I'll be in the kitchen making dinner. Holler if you need anything. He left her alone again, and Sarah struggled to her feet. Her legs trembled but held. She changed quickly, grateful to be out of the wet, frozen dress. Her sister's clothes fit surprisingly well, a simple cotton dress in a faded blue, worn soft from years of washing. There were wool socks too, thick and warm. She pulled them on and wiggled her toes, feeling returning to her feet. She looked around the room properly for the first time. It was larger than she had realized, with exposed beams overhead and windows that were shuttered against the storm. The furniture was handmade but well-crafted, each piece solid and functional. Animal pelts hung on the walls, bear and deer and elk. There were books on a shelf near the window, more than she would have expected. A rifle hung over the mantel, and beside it, a photograph in a simple frame. She moved closer to look at it. The photograph showed a family. A stern-looking man and a woman with kind eyes, and between them, 2 children. A girl of perhaps 12, and a boy a few years older. The boy had Jack's eyes, even in the faded image. His family, she realized. All gone now except for the sister in California. She felt a pang of sympathy. He was alone out here, just as alone as she had been in Boston, surrounded by people who didn't understand her. That was taken 20 years ago. Jack's voice came from behind her, startling her. She turned to find him watching her from the doorway. My mother insisted we go into town for it. Cost my father a week's wages, but she wanted something to remember us by. His expression was unreadable. She died that winter. Pneumonia. My father lasted another 5 years before his heart gave out. Left me this place and all the debts that came with it. I'm sorry, Sarah said softly. Long time ago now. He gestured toward a table near the fire. Dinner's ready. Nothing fancy, just stew and bread. But it's hot. They sat across from each other at the heavy wooden table, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the walls. The stew was simple but good, thick with meat and vegetables and rich broth. Sarah realized she was starving and ate quickly, too hungry to be polite. Jack ate in silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the companionable quiet of two people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. When she finally set down her spoon, she felt more human than she had in days. "That was wonderful," she said. "Thank you. You needed it." Jack poured them both coffee from a pot on the stove, strong and black. "So tell me about this teaching job. What made you want to come all the way out here?" Sarah wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, choosing her words carefully. "I wanted to make a difference. To help children learn, to give them opportunities I never had. And I wanted to prove that I could be more than what everyone expected me to be." She met his eyes. "In Boston, I was just someone's daughter. Someone's future wife. I wanted to be myself." Jack nodded slowly. "Copper Ridge is a hard place. Most of the families there are barely scraping by. The children work the farms and ranches more than they study. You'll have your work cut out for you." "I'm not afraid of hard work." "I can see that." He studied her over his coffee. "Takes guts to come out here alone. Takes even more guts to admit you're running from something." "What about you?" Sarah asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "Are you running from something too?" For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down his cup and leaned back in his chair. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to prove something to myself. That I can make this place work. That I'm worth more than what people said I was." He touched the scar on his face unconsciously. "Got this in the war. Gettysburg. I was 18, stupid enough to think I was invincible. Bullet grazed my skull, should have killed me. Woke up in a hospital tent 3 days later with a field doctor telling me I'd never be right again. Told me I should go home, that I'd never make it out here. But you did." "But I did," he smiled, and it transformed his face completely. "Guess we're both stubborn fools trying to prove something." Sarah found herself smiling back. "I suppose we are." Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the shutters. The storm showed no signs of letting up. But inside, by the fire, with this unexpected man across from her, Sarah felt warmer than she had in months. Maybe years. She thought about the life she had left behind, the suffocating expectations and the loveless marriage she had escaped. She thought about the uncertain future waiting for her in Copper Ridge, teaching children in a place she had never seen. And she realized that right now, in this moment, she was exactly where she needed to be. "You should get some rest," Jack said eventually. "You can have my bed. I'll sleep out here by the fire." "I couldn't take your bed," Sarah protested. "You already survived a blizzard and a stagecoach crash today. Don't make me argue with you too." His tone was gentle but firm. "The bedroom's through that door. There's extra blankets if you need them." She wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a weight. She stood, swaying slightly, and Jack was there immediately, his hand under her elbow to steady her. "Easy," he murmured. "You've been through a lot." "Jack," she said, looking up at him. He was so close she could see flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Why did you help me? You could have ridden past. No one would have blamed you for staying inside during a storm like this." He was quiet for a moment, his hand still on her arm. "I know what it's like to need help and not get it. To be alone when you need someone most." His voice was rough with emotion. "I wasn't going to let that happen to someone else. Not if I could prevent it." Something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. Sarah reached up and touched his scarred cheek gently. "Thank you," she whispered. "For being the kind of man who rides into storms." Then she turned and went into the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. She stood there for a moment, her heart pounding, her hand still tingling from where she had touched his face. What was happening to her? She had known this man for mere hours. And yet something had shifted inside her, something fundamental and terrifying and wonderful all at once. She climbed into the bed, which smelled of pine and leather and him. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but she felt safe here in this rough house in the middle of nowhere. She pulled the blankets up to her chin and closed her eyes, but sleep was slow to come. Her mind kept returning to Jack's face, to the gentleness in his hands despite their size, to the loneliness she had seen in his eyes that matched her own. She had come west looking for freedom, for a new life. She hadn't expected to find this. To find him. As she finally drifted off to sleep, she found herself wondering what the next 3 days would bring, trapped here together while the storm raged outside. And for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't afraid of what the future might hold. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of wood being chopped outside. For a moment, she was disoriented, not remembering where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The crash, the blizzard, Jack. She sat up quickly, then winced as pain shot through her head where she had struck it during the accident. Sunlight filtered weakly through gaps in the shutters, painting stripes across the rough wooden floor. The storm hadn't broken yet, she could hear wind still howling, but there was light, which meant it was day. She had no idea if it was the morning after the crash or if she had slept longer. She rose carefully, her body stiff and sore. The mirror above the washstand showed a stranger staring back at her. Her hair was a wild tangle, and there was a dark bruise on her temple, but her eyes were bright and alert. She was alive. She washed her face with water from the pitcher, grateful it wasn't frozen, then did her best to tame her hair into a simple braid. The borrowed dress was wrinkled from sleeping in it, but it would have to do. When she emerged from the bedroom, the main room was empty except for the fire crackling in the hearth. The front door opened, bringing in a blast of cold air and Jack, his arms full of firewood. Snow clung to his hat and shoulders, and his breath misted in the sudden chill. He stopped when he saw her, and something flickered across his face before he composed himself. "You're up," he said, kicking the door closed behind him. "How's your head?" "It hurts, but I'll survive." She moved closer to the fire, suddenly aware of how domestic this felt. How natural. "How long did I sleep?" "About 16 hours. It's morning, second day of the storm." He stacked the wood by the hearth with practiced efficiency. "I checked on you a few times during the night. Wanted to make sure you didn't have a concussion." The thought of him watching over her while she slept should have felt intrusive, but instead it made her chest tight with an emotion she couldn't name. "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." "Yeah, I did." He straightened, brushing snow from his coat. "Coffee's hot. There's eggs and bacon keeping warm on the stove. Eat something." She wanted to protest that she could take care of herself, but the smell of food made her stomach growl loudly. Jack's lips twitched with a suppressed smile. "All right," she conceded. "But next time, I'm cooking." "Deal." They fell into an easy rhythm. Sarah ate while Jack removed his wet outer layers and hung them to dry. The bacon was crispy, the eggs perfectly cooked. She wondered how a man who lived alone out here had learned to cook so well, but she didn't ask. There would be time for questions. They had nothing but time while the storm raged. After breakfast, Jack showed her around the house. It was larger than it had seemed the night before, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that was surprisingly well stocked, and a root cellar accessible through a trap door in the floor. There were shelves lined with preserved vegetables and dried meat, enough to last months if necessary. He had prepared for isolation, she realized. This wasn't a man who was caught off guard by harsh winters. "You built all this yourself?" she asked, running her hand along a shelf that had been sanded smooth. "Most of it. My father built the original cabin, just 2 rooms. I added on after he died. Figured if I was going to be stuck out here, I might as well be comfortable." He watched her explore with an expression she couldn't read. "You can go anywhere you want. Nothing's off limits. Might as well make yourself at home." "For 3 days," she reminded him. "For 3 days," he agreed. But something in his tone suggested he wasn't entirely pleased about the time limit. The day passed strangely. Outside, the world was chaos, wind screaming and snow piling in drifts that reached the windows. Inside, time seemed suspended. Jack showed her his small collection of books, mostly practical volumes about ranching and animal husbandry, but also a few novels and a volume of Shakespeare that was clearly well read. They sat by the fire and talked, carefully at first, then with increasing ease. She told him about Boston, about her mother who had loved music and died too young, about her father who had grown cold and distant after her death. She told him about the banker with cruel eyes and the night she had seen an advertisement for a teacher wanted in Montana Territory. She had applied immediately, not even thinking, driven by a desperation to escape. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to rope and brand cattle before he could read. About the war and the things he had seen that still haunted him. About coming home to find his father ailing and the ranch in debt. About working himself half to death for 5 years to pay off those debts and make the place profitable again. "Sounds lonely," Sarah said softly. "It is," he admitted. "But lonely's better than being around people who look at you like you're broken. Like you're less than you were before." He touched his scar again, that unconscious gesture. "In town, folks stare. Women cross the street when they see me coming. Children ask their mothers what happened to my face. Out here, there's no one to judge." Sarah felt a surge of anger on his behalf. "They're fools. You're not broken. You're just scarred. There's a difference." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt the intensity of his gaze down to her bones. "Most people don't see it that way. Then most people are blind." Something shifted between them in that moment. The air seemed to thicken, charged with a tension that was part awareness, part longing. Jack cleared his throat and stood abruptly. "I should check on the horses. Make sure they have enough feed. I'll come with you." He started to protest, but she was already pulling on the coat he had lent her, too large but warm. "It's dangerous out there," he said. "Visibility's almost zero. Then you'll need someone to make sure you don't get lost." She smiled at him. "Besides, I'm going crazy cooped up in here. I need to move." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Stay close to me. Hold on to my belt if you need to. If we get separated out there, you could freeze to death before I found you." "Understood." He roped them together, a practical precaution that felt oddly intimate. Then they stepped out into the storm. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. The world was nothing but white, the barn barely visible even though it was only 50 feet away. Jack kept one hand on the rope, the other on her arm, guiding her through snow that reached her knees. It took what felt like hours but was probably only minutes to reach the barn door. Jack wrestled it open, and they stumbled inside, grateful for the relative warmth and shelter.